They said he was the dumbest boy the city had ever seen, a shame to his family, a curse to his teachers, and a walking proof that some minds were not meant to learn. His report cards were disasters, his name a joke whispered in the dusty school corridors. On the day they expelled him, the principal tore his file in front of the entire assembly and said, "Obinna will never amount to anything." The laughter that followed chased him out of the gate, barefoot, humiliated, and silent. But 10 years later, the same school that mocked him stood on the edge of ruin, its walls cracked, its glory fading, and the very boy they called useless drove through those gates in a car no one in that town had ever seen before. They said he had returned with something powerful, something the school desperately needed to survive. But the question everyone whispered that day was the same. What happened to Obinna in those 10 years, and what exactly did he bring back with him? If you love powerful African urban folk tales filled with mystery, redemption, and deep lessons, hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss a story from our heritage. In the middle of Port Harcourt, where the air smells of fuel and fried plantain, stood Chinasa International College, the pride of the city, a place where rich men's children spoke through their noses and the poor ones sat at the back trying not to be noticed. The school gates were painted gold, but its heart was full of pride. That was where Obinna grew up, the son of a carpenter who made desks for the same school that would later throw his child out. His mother sewed roasted corn by the roadside, her hands always black with charcoal, her eyes tired but filled with quiet hope. Every morning she would whisper, "My son, one day your head will shine brighter than these coals." But life in the city had no mercy for dreamers. While other children wore ironed uniforms and carried phones, Obinna came to school with torn shirts and shoes that coughed dust. They called him Radio Boy because he liked to pick up broken radios from the trash, fixing them with wires and bottle caps. In class, he asked questions that made even the teachers uncomfortable, questions that had no answers in the textbook. And because the teachers didn't understand his kind of thinking, they labeled him a fool. The students laughed at him, especially the rich ones. "Carpenter pikin, your brain dey leak like your father's roof." But Obinna never replied. He would stare at the clouds through the classroom window, lost in thoughts nobody could enter. Sometimes he drew strange shapes in his notebook, designs of machines that could move without fuel, lights that never went off, cities that glowed like the sun. Every day after school, while others played football, Obinna helped his father in the small workshop behind their wooden house. He loved the sound of the hammer and saw, the smell of fresh wood. He believed that even wood had a kind of wisdom. It could bend, it could break, but it could also build. His father, a man of few words, would often sigh and say, "Boy, the world doesn't feed dreamers, it eats them." But Obinna would only smile and whisper, "Then maybe I'll feed the world first." It was a time when the city itself felt alive, the buses shouting for passengers, the smell of rain mixing with dust, the sound of distant laughter, and somewhere in the noise, the quiet beating of a boy's stubborn heart. Nobody saw it coming, but something was already forming in that small heart, something bigger than the shame they gave him, stronger than the laughter that chased him from school. Years later, people will still ask, what changed him? But the truth began right there, in the same streets that mocked him, in the same school that rejected him, in the same dust where he once stood barefoot, staring at the gates that now waited for his return. And if those walls could talk, they would tell the story of the day everything began to shift, the day the boy they called dumb decided to stop chasing approval and started chasing destiny. But before that turning came, something strange happened, something that nobody in the city could explain, not even Obinna himself. The day everything changed began like any other, the air thick with heat, the classrooms noisy with laughter, and Obinna sitting alone at the back, his eyes fixed on a blank sheet of paper. It was exam day. the final test that would decide who was fit to move forward and who would be left behind. The teacher walked between the rows, cane in hand, her shoes clicking against the tiles. When she reached Obinna, she stopped, her shadow falling across his desk. His paper was empty, not a single word. "Are you sleeping or thinking you are smarter than the rest?" she asked, her voice sharp. The class turned to look. Obinna opened his mouth, but said nothing. He had written his answers in his mind, diagrams and patterns no one else could see, but he couldn't put them down in the words they expected. When the results came out, his name stood alone at the bottom. 0 in every subject. The teacher held the sheet high for everyone to see, shaking her head in mock pity. "This one," she said, "is beyond help." The laughter that followed cut deeper than any slap. The principal was called, his face hard as stone. "You are a disgrace to this school. Your presence lowers our standard. Go home and don't return until you find your brain." The whole assembly yard went quiet as the guards opened the gate. The other students whispered behind their hands. Some smiled. Obinna stood there for a moment, looking at the walls that had once held his dreams. Then he turned and walked away barefoot, his books clutched to his chest as clouds gathered above. By the time he reached home, the rain had started. His mother was outside roasting corn, her hands fighting the fire against the wind. When she saw him, she ran forward thinking he had fallen sick, but one look at his face told her everything. He dropped his books in the mud and she sank to her knees, crying quietly. Inside, his father sat by the window, carving wood. Without looking up, he said, "Maybe books are not for our kind. Maybe your hands should do what mine do." That night, the rain didn't stop. Obinna lay on the floor beside his father's tools, staring at the ceiling. The words of the principal echoed in his head: a disgrace, a fool, a waste. Something heavy pressed against his chest, but somewhere inside that pain, a new voice began to whisper, "Prove them wrong." At dawn, before anyone woke, he packed a small bag, a few clothes, a broken radio, and his mother's old wrapper. He left a note that simply said, "I'll come back when I have something to show." His mother found it hours later and ran down the street barefoot, calling his name, but the boy was gone, swallowed by the noise of the city. Life in Port Harcourt was not kind to boys with no certificates. Obinna worked wherever he was accepted, cleaning offices, washing cars, even shouting for bus passengers at busy junctions. The city moved too fast to care about his story. At night, when others slept, he sat beside dumpsters picking up wires and old circuit boards. He listened to the hum of generators, to the rhythm of the city, trying to understand how things worked. He failed many times. Some nights, he went hungry. Others, he slept under broken roofs when the rain hicked through. But the spark inside him refused to die. He remembered the teacher's laughter, the principal's words, the look in his mother's eyes. He told himself he would not remain the boy they threw away. He would build something, anything that would make the world remember his name. One evening, while searching through scraps behind a mechanic workshop, he found an old man sitting on a stool, fixing a lamp with trembling hands. The man watched him silently for a while, then said, "You have the eyes of someone who listens to machines." Obinna looked up, surprised. The old man smiled faintly. "You remind me of myself before the city chewed me up. If you want to learn, come back tomorrow." That night, Obinna couldn't sleep. The words rolled in his head like thunder. Who was the old man? Why did he see something no one else ever did? And what kind of work could he teach that made even the machines listen? The next morning, Obinna returned to the scrapyard. The old man was there, sitting on the same stool, his fingers black with oil, his eyes sharp, like he had seen the world's secrets. His name was Babatunde, a retired engineer who once worked for a big oil company before the city forgot him. He spoke little, but every word carried weight. "You want to understand machines?" he asked. Obinna nodded. Babatunde handed him a broken fan and said, "Then start by fixing this."
That was the beginning. Days turned into weeks. Obinna swept the yard, carried heavy metal, fetched water, and watched. Babatunde didn't teach like a normal teacher. He never said, "Do it this way." Instead, he asked questions, the kind that made Obinna think deeply. Why do you think this machine fails? What happens when light meets motion? What would you build if nothing stopped you? Slowly, Obinna began to understand. He learned to see machines not as objects, but as living things, things that breathe through wires and veins of current. Babatunde taught him about circuits, engines, and power, but also about patience. Sometimes, the old man said, destiny hides behind failure. The world will laugh at you until the day it needs what you carry. Years passed. Obinna grew taller, stronger, wiser. The city forgot his past, but he never did. His hands, once soft and unsure, became steady and skilled. He could take apart a radio blindfolded and rebuild it from memory. When Babatunde's health began to fail, Obinna stayed by his side, repairing old machines in exchange for wisdom. One night, under the dim light of a kerosene lamp, Babatunde handed him a small notebook filled with sketches and equations. "This is my unfinished dream, a way to make power from the sun, cheap enough for even the poorest man. The world laughed at me for chasing it. Maybe it was waiting for you." After Babatunde passed, Obinna felt a silence deeper than grief. But in that silence, he made a promise. He would finish what the old man started. He rented a small shack near the waterfront and turned it into a workshop. By day, he repaired phones, fans, and generators for neighbors who paid him in coins or food. By night, he studied Babatunde's notes, experimenting with wires, glass, and batteries scavenged from dump sites. He failed many times. Some nights his hands bled. Some mornings he sloped to find smoke filling his workshop from another failed test. But he kept going. He remembered the day they laughed at him, the rain-soaked road, his mother's tears. Each memory became fuel. One evening, while the city sank into darkness during another power outage, Obinna's little shack stayed bright. His invention, a small box made from scrap metal and solar plate, hummed quietly, giving light to the room. He stepped outside, staring at the glow spilling onto the street. The neighbors gathered, whispering. One woman asked, "Obinna, where's this light from?" He smiled and said, "From the sun we all share." Soon, he began building more of them, installing them on small kiosks and roadside shops. The vendors who once closed early because of blackout now worked late into the night. People started calling him the boy who brought light. Word spread. A local journalist noticed the sudden brightness in a part of the city known for darkness. He came to see for himself and was shocked to find the same young man fixing lights using discarded parts. The journalist filmed him, asked his story, and Obinna spoke simply. "They said I was too dumb for school. Maybe I was just learning something they couldn't teach." The video spread fast. Within days, people across the country were talking about him. Investors called. Universities invited him to speak. The same teachers who once mocked him shared his story on social media, pretending pride. But behind every smile, behind every handshake, Obinna knew not all intentions were pure. Some wanted his idea, not his dream. Still, the city celebrated him. Posters with his face covered the streets. The boy who brought light. But as the cheers grew louder, so did a quiet voice inside him. A voice that asked the one question he couldn't silence. Why now, after all these years, was the same school that threw him away asking him to return? And what did they really want from the boy they once called worthless?
10 years had crawled by since that stormy day he left home barefoot, chasing a dream nobody believed in. The city had chewed him, beaten him, and spat him back out. But somehow, he had found a way to shine through its smoke and noise. Obinna had become a name whispered with pride across neighborhoods. From the woman selling akara by the gutter to the man reading the newspaper under a mango tree, they all spoke of the same boy, the boy who brought light. But that morning, when the letter came, something inside him froze. The brown envelope carried a school emblem he thought he'd never see again. Chinaza International College. The same place that once broke his spirit now wanted him back. He opened the letter slowly, the paper trembling in his hand. The principal, that same man who once called him a disgrace, now wrote with polished humility, asking him to return as a guest speaker for their Innovation Day. His words were smooth, too smooth, like someone washing away old sins with fine perfume. "We believe your story will inspire our students," it said. For a long moment, Obinna just stared. The past had come knocking, not softly, but with the weight of every humiliation he ever swallowed. When he finally returned to the school, the sun was dipping low, casting long shadows across the gate. It felt smaller now, weaker somehow. The walls that once seemed mighty looked cracked and tired, the paint peeling like old lies. The gatesman who used to chase him off with insults now straightened his uniform and saluted. "Ah, Oga Obinna, welcome, sir." The word sir stung him, sweet and strange. He nodded and walked in. Inside, students in neat uniforms whispered as he passed. "That's him," one of them said. "The man on TV." They looked at him the way people look at legends, with a mix of disbelief and wonder. The teachers too were uneasy. Some smiled too hard, some looked away. And then, standing near the assembly stage, he saw the principal. Age had softened him. His once proud face now sagged with guilt. "Obinna," he said quietly, stretching out a hand. Obinna looked at it, the same hand that once pointed him toward the gate of shame, and after a pause, he took it. When he stepped onto the stage, the hall went silent. The air felt thick. His heart pounded like the drums of a distant festival. For a moment, words failed him. Then he looked into the faces before him, hundreds of young eyes filled with curiosity, fear, and dreams too big for the classrooms they sat in. He smiled faintly and began. "They said I was too dumb for this school. They said I would never amount to anything. But what they didn't know was that the world has many ways of teaching, and not all of them happen in classrooms." The hall was quiet enough to hear a pin drop. Even the ceiling fan seemed to slow down to listen. Some of us learn through hunger, through failure, through rejection, through nights when the only light we have is our own fire. His words hit deep. Tears slid down a teacher's face, the same teacher who once tore his test paper in front of the class. The principal bowed his head. When he finished speaking, he lifted a small package beside him and opened it. Inside were 50 neatly packed solar kits. He said, "I brought these, so that the next time power goes out, your dreams won't have to wait for NEPA." The students gasped, clapped, cheered. But behind the joy, something deeper stirred in the room. Regret, realization, respect. As the applause thundered, Obinna looked around, at the walls that once witnessed his humiliation, at the faces that once mocked him. He should have felt victory, but all he felt was an ache, a strange emptiness that success could not fill. Because behind the joy, one question echoed quietly in his mind, sharp as a blade. If destiny hadn't pushed him through pain, would he have ever found the light? That night, as he drove away from the school, the moon hanging pale above Port Harcourt's skyline, he couldn't shake that thought. He had conquered his past, but something darker was waiting ahead, something the lights couldn't touch. Because as his headlights cut through the night, a strange shadow moved across the road, following him. Was it a trick of the light? Or was the past not done with him yet? They say the night reveals what daylight hides. And as Obinna drove through the sleeping city, his mind replayed the faces, the cheers, the tears. It should have felt like triumph, yet his chest was heavy, like a man carrying more than his share of blessings. The shadow that had followed him on the road still lingered in his thoughts, but deeper still was the whisper of memory. That little boy in torn uniform, drenched in rain, clutching broken books. The world now saw a genius, but that boy still lived inside him, small, bruised and quiet. The road to greatness, he thought, is a strange thing. It begins with laughter, not the sweet kind, but the laughter of mockery. It winds through hunger and ends where only the patient survive. In his rearview mirror, the city lights blinked like scattered stars, and he remembered Babatunde's words, spoken long ago in that rusty scrapyard. My son, when life calls you a fool, smile. Fools sometimes build the future while the wise are still talking. He smiled faintly now, realizing the old man had been right. Grades had failed him, teachers had failed him, even hope had once failed him. Yet failure was the forge where his spirit was shaped. In Africa, they say, when the blacksmith beats the iron, it cries out, but when it cools, it becomes useful. That was him. The heat, the pain, the noise. It had all been shaping something bigger than he could understand back then. He parked by the roadside for a moment, the engine humming softly. The night air carried the smell of roasted corn, just like his mother used to sell. He remembered her voice, gentle, cracked with struggle, yet full of faith. Obinna, she used to say, one day people will see what I see. He wished she were alive to see it now, but maybe she could. Maybe every flicker of his solar lights was her smile shining back from beyond. In the distance, a young boy walked past, barefoot, holding a broken toy car. Obinna watched him closely. The boy stopped under a dim street light, trying to fix the toy with a stick. Something about him, that stubborn focus, that refusal to give up, mirrored the same fire Obinna once carried. He got out of his car and called the boy over. "What's your name?" he asked. "Chidi," the boy said shyly. "What are you fixing?" The boy lifted the broken car. "It doesn't move again, but I will make it move." Obinna's chest tightened. He reached into his car, brought out one of the remaining solar kits, and handed it to the boy. "Here," he said, "when you grow up, use this to fix something bigger." The boy's eyes widened. "Are you the man on TV?" he asked. Obinna chuckled. "I used to be the boy everyone laughed at too." The boy nodded slowly, like he understood something deep, something even words couldn't capture. As the boy ran off into the dark, clutching the box like treasure, Obinna whispered to himself, "The world doesn't lack smart people. It only lacks those who believe in the broken ones." He leaned against his car and looked up at the sky. Endless, dark, yet full of light if you knew where to look. In that moment, he understood that true intelligence wasn't about books or exams. It was about the courage to see light where others saw nothing. And so his story became more than his own. In every small town, in every school where a child sat forgotten, his name became a whisper of hope. Mothers told their children, "Remember Obinna, the boy who brought light." And when people laughed at the dreamers, the stubborn, the misfits, elders would shake their heads and say, "When the cock crows before dawn, some laugh until the sun rises." For in every market, there's a seller of wisdom, but not everyone knows how to buy. Obinna's journey reminded the world that destiny doesn't wear fine clothes, it hides in the dust. That rejection isn't a curse, it's a compass. That the one mocked today may be the one we kneel to tomorrow. But as he turned back towards the city, a strange wind blew, dry, sharp, and cold against his face. The streetlight flickered once, twice, then went out completely. In the rearview mirror, for just a heartbeat, he thought he saw Babatunde standing by the roadside, smiling. Then the smile faded. The road stretched ahead, long, dark, and silent. And Obinna couldn't help but wonder, had his light truly chased away the darkness, or had it only made the shadows more patient? They say every story ends, but some stories turn around and begin again. Obinna's name now traveled beyond Port Harcourt, beyond Nigeria, whispered in classrooms, printed on billboards, praised by men who once wouldn't let him touch their gates. Yet behind all the lights and applause One question still echoed inside him. If success came from pain, why did peace feel so far away? He drove through the city that once broke him, now glowing with the very light he created. Every street light seemed to carry a memory, the laughter, the rain, the tears. But inside those same lights, another shadow stared, the reminder that greatness carries a price, and not everyone who claps for you means well. Some now call him a hero, others call him lucky, but only he knew the nights of hunger, the loneliness, the voice that once told him, "You will never be enough." And maybe that's where every story connects, in that quiet place between doubt and destiny. Because sometimes what breaks us also builds us. The world may not see it, but everyone carries a version of Obinna's journey inside them. The failure that shaped them, the laughter that scarred them, the small victory that nobody clapped for. So I'll ask you this. Have you ever been told you are not good enough? Have you ever watched people laugh while you tried to rise? What did you do about it? Did you give up? Or did you turn their mockery into your fire? Tell your story in the comments, because somewhere out there, another dreamer is listening, waiting to hear that it is possible to fall and still rise, to be forgotten and still shine. And maybe, just maybe, your words tonight could be the spark that lights another person's path. But tell me, when that moment finally comes and the world that once mocked you begins to clap, will you forgive them or will you remind them who you've become? The day Obinna left the school grounds, the sun seemed gentler, almost as if it knew what he had endured to reach that moment. The students followed him with their eyes, whispering in awe. Teachers who once called him hopeless now lowered their heads, their pride melting into silence. Even the old principal stood still, clutching his walking stick, lost for words. Obinna smiled politely, shook a few hands, and walked towards the gate that once marked his greatest shame, now his greatest triumph. But unknown to everyone, something far more curious awaited him outside those same gates. As he reached the parking lot, where reporters and students gathered to take pictures, his gaze caught a man standing under the old almond tree, tall, wrapped in a faded agbada, a carved walking stick by his side. His eyes were sharp, too knowing, the kind that seemed to carry old stories and unfinished business. For a brief second, Obinna thought his mind was playing tricks. The man looked exactly like Baba Tunde, his old mentor, but older, darker, and with a quiet intensity that sent chills down his spine. He smiled faintly, then called his name in a voice that carried the weight of time itself. "Obinna, you've done well, just like my father said you would." Obinna froze. "Your father?" The man nodded slowly. "Baba Tunde, he's gone now, but before he died, he told me if I ever found the boy who brought light to darkness, I should give him something he left unfinished." He reached into his bag and pulled out a small, rusted metal box, the same kind Baba Tunde once used to store his secret blueprints. Obinna took it with trembling hands, the air thick with an unspoken mystery. The man's expression darkened. "Inside this box is the plan for something your teacher never completed. He said it was a gift, but also a warning. Whatever you do, open it alone and never at night." Then without another word, the man turned and walked into the crowd, disappearing as if he had never been there. Obinna stood still, the box heavy in his hand, the noise of the school fading behind him. For a long moment, he couldn't breathe. Every instinct in him wanted to open it right there, but Baba Tunde's voice echoed in his memory. Not everything that gives light is meant to shine. That night, as Obinna sat by his window, staring at the old metal box under the dim lamp, something began to hum inside it. His hands shook, the city lights flickered once, twice, then went out completely. And somewhere in the darkness, a voice whispered his name. If you enjoy powerful African folk tales about redemption, wisdom, and destiny, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. Join us next time for another story that will move your heart and challenge your spirit. Because Obinna's story is far from over.